Welcome everyone to lesson number 6, the final lesson of Secrets of the Bible, iconic stories, mystical meanings, and their lessons for life. Tonight we're going to be discussing, which is perhaps one of the lesser known biblical stories, the story of Korach's rebellion. Now Korach was a unique individual. He really had it all. He had wealth, he had connections, he had power, he had prestige, he had honor, but unfortunately, like for many, he was not satisfied. This was not good enough for him. He wanted more. He let a personal vendetta get in the way. He used that to divide the Jewish people. And unfortunately for him, he met a horrific end. Of course, how are we meant to understand the story? The only way that we can truly understand it on the deepest level, we have to look at the inner story. We have to look at the soul of the story. We have to appreciate the cosmic significance of the events between Korach and Moshe. We have to look at it in light of what is the purpose that God created the world, and how does this story advance the purpose for creation. And of course, at the end, we'll come away with a life lesson. So we'll begin with the story of Korach and a video presentation.
Korach, the son of Yitzhar, the son of Levi, took up the fight with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and on the son of Peleth, children of Reuben. They rose up before Moses with 250 men from the children of Israel, chieftains of the congregation, those called to the assembly, men of renown. They congregated upon Moses and Aaron and said to them, "Enough! The entire community is holy, and God is amongst them. Why do you raise yourselves above the congregation of God?" Moses heard, and he fell on his face. He spoke to Korach and to all his company, saying, "Come morning, and God will make known who is his, and who is holy, and will bring them near to him, and the one whom he will choose, he will bring near to him." "Do this, take yourselves pans, Korach and all his company, put fire in them, and place incense upon them before God tomorrow, and the man whom God chooses, he is the Holy One. You have taken too much upon yourselves, sons of Levi."
Moses also tries to diffuse the rebellion with gentle persuasion.
"Please listen, sons of Levi. Is it not enough that the God of Israel has distinguished you from the congregation of Israel, to draw you near to him to perform the service of the tabernacle of God, and to stand before the congregation to minister to them? He drew you near, and all your brothers, the sons of Levi, with you, and you seek also the priesthood?"
But all Moses' efforts to convince them of the error of their ways fail, and the rebellious faction meets with a tragic end.
The ground split beneath them. The earth opened her mouth and swallowed them in their houses. They and all they possessed descended alive into the abyss. The earth covered them up, and they were lost to the community. And a fire came forth from God and consumed the 250 men who had offered up the incense.
So when it comes to the story of Korach, there really are dozens of questions that a person can ask. And there are so many different approaches and angles that a person can explore the story with. I regret that we only have the time to have one approach, because we could have a 6-week course just based on this story and peeling back the layers and the layers and the layers of the arguments that Korach was presenting against Moshe and the responses of Moshe to Korach. Tonight, we're going to ask 3 questions, and we're going to answer these questions by presenting 3 big ideas. Question number one. Korach argued that everyone is equally holy. Why was he wrong? Not only does it seem at the surface of it strange to say that he's wrong, but if you look at a few texts, we'll see that it would actually appear that he's quite right. Let's go to text number 3. Karen, could you please read text number 3?
The entire community is holy. At Mount Sinai, everyone heard God proclaim, "I am God, your God. So why do you elevate yourselves?"
You may remember in last week's class, we talked about what was so unique about the giving of the Torah. What was unique about it is that every single Jew at the giving of the Torah became a prophet. Every single Jew was worthy of witnessing, hearing, and experiencing God speaking directly to them. And the Torah itself says that the Jewish nation is a nation of priests. It's a nation of kings. It's a holy nation. The Jews are all holy. So all that Korach is doing is pointing out something which is a clear and obvious fact, that all of the Jewish people are holy. Why is there a hierarchical difference between Moshe, between Aaron, and the rest of the Jewish people? All are holy. All are worthy of conversing and communicating directly with God himself. Now, Korach lived before the age of the internet, before social media, before there were viral videos. So he had to figure a way how to market his idea, his position to the rest of the Jewish people. So it is recorded a few of his arguments that he made. Text number 4. Andrew, please. I know you are the Kohen, but because of all the conflicts in this Torah portion with the Kohen, I felt it would be better for you to go second. Although maybe based on the answer of the class, you still should go first, but I apologize. Either way, Andrew,
Okay.
text number 4.
Korach gathered 250 magistrates, most of them from the tribe of Reuben, his neighbors. He dressed them in garments that were entirely of blue wool. They came and stood before Moses and asked him, "If a garment is made entirely of blue wool, does it require tzitzit, or is it absolved?" Moses answered them, "It requires tzitzit." They began to laugh at him. "If a garment of another sort is absolved by a single thread of blue wool, this garment, composed wholly of blue wool, cannot absolve itself."
So Korach wants to make Moshe look like a fool. So he comes up with what he believes is a very clever question. In the Torah, it says that if a person wears tzitzis, you're obligated to have one blue strand of tzitzis. And there's interesting laws of how you make it and why we don't have it today, but we'll put that aside for the moment. For tzitzis to be kosher, you should have one blue strand. So Korach asked the question, what if the entire garment that you're wearing is blue? Do you need to add a blue strand? And Moshe says, absolutely, that's the law. Korach says, that's ridiculous. If one strand can absolve an entire garment, how much more so if the entire garment is blue? Now, on the surface of it, it might just seem like a clever, interesting question that may appear on the surface to make Moshe look foolish. But as we're going to see, there was depth to the question. There was an agenda that Korach had, and he perfectly fit his agenda into his questions. And his next question, text number 5, is quite similar. Mitchell, would you like to read text number 5?
Okay. Korach sprang up and said to Moses, "If a house is full of Torah scrolls, is it absolved from the obligation to fix a mezuzah on its doorpost?" Replied Moses, "It requires a mezuzah." Said Korach, "The entire Torah, consisting of 275 chapters, does not absolve this house. And 2 chapters in the mezuzah absolve it. God did not command you these things, but invented them yourself."
So here, Korach comes up with a very similar challenge to Moshe. If you have an entire house, an entire room, it's full of holy Torah books, do you need to have a mezuzah? Moshe says, absolutely. Korach says this is a joke. If one little scroll can exempt an entire room, why on earth would you need a scroll on the door if you have a room that's full of scrolls? Moshe, stop mixing in. Stop mixing into the Jewish people. You invented it. You made this up. It's your own mishigas, right? This is your own program. Don't mix in. Again, we're going to see that this wasn't just a question that was designed to make Moshe look foolish, but there was a philosophical approach behind it. His third challenge that he made to Moshe is perhaps the most difficult to read and the one that is the most powerful argument and the most emotional. It's a little bit of a longer text. Phil, if you would like to read this text, go for it. Read it with the appropriate emotion that the text conveys. Text number 6.
Okay, can you hear me, Rabbi?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Korach gathered the congregation against them. He began to speak mockery, saying to the people, "There was a widow in my neighborhood with 2 orphaned girls, and she had 1 field. When she came to plow, Moses said to her, 'Do not plow with an ox and a donkey together.' She came to sow, Moses said to her, 'Do not sow your field with mixed seeds.' When she came to harvest and to stack heaps of cut grain, Moses said to her, 'Leave the gleanings, forgotten sheaf, and edges of the field for the poor.' When she came to bring the grain in storage, he said to her, 'Contribute the priest's due from the tithe and the first and second tithes.' She accepted the judgment and gave it to him. What did she do? She sold her field and bought 2 sheep so that she could clothe herself with the shearings and benefit from what they brought forth. But when the sheep gave birth, Aaron came and said to her, 'Give me the firstborns, for thus has God said to me, every male firstborn from your cattle and from your flocks you shall consecrate to God.' She accepted the judgment and gave it to him. The time came to shear them, and Aaron said to her, 'Give me the first of the shearing, and thus has God said to me, the first of the shearing of your flock you should give to me.' The woman said, 'I don't have the strength to resist this man. I will slaughter them and eat them.' As soon as she had slaughtered them, Aaron said to her, 'Give me the shoulder, the cheeks, and the stomach.' The woman said to him, 'Even when I have slaughtered them, I have not escaped your hand. I can take an oath upon myself that they should be Sharon, off limits to everybody.' So Aaron said to her, 'Give them to me, for this is what your scripture says. Every cherub in Israel shall be yours.' Saying this, he took them and went off, leaving her and her 2 daughters crying. How contemptuously do they treat these poor people? This they do, and they attribute it to God."
This is quite the emotional text, quite the powerful text. Korach is making a very, very strong argument here. What is the common denominator between these 3 stories? What is the point that Korach is trying to make? Anyone picked up on it? Anyone have any thoughts? See, Korach is challenging the leadership of Moshe. He says, "Moshe, we're all holy people. Why do you place yourself somehow above us and then mix into our life? We don't need you because we're all holy." And this theme is expressed in all 3 of his challenges. When it comes to the tzitzis, what does he say? If the entire garment is blue, we don't need a string of tzitzis. We don't need some special string to come in here and tell us it's kosher. It's all blue. It's all good, right? We're all holy. We don't need some extra different special thing to come in here and lead us. The same argument he makes with the room full of Torah scrolls. He says the room full of Torah scrolls doesn't need your special mezuzah, right, to make us all rectified. We're all holy. We're all Torah scrolls. We don't need that. The same thing he says here, you have a Jewish woman who's a widow. She's doing what she can to support her family, which is valiant, which is holy, which is beautiful. We don't need this Kohen mixing into her life and getting all involved and having a negative impact and effect on her. So Korach was making a very compelling argument, a very powerful argument, and an argument that actually was quite popular amongst a lot of the Jewish people. Right? It was very attractive to a lot of the Jewish people.
Question.
Yes,
Is he
Avi.
suggesting that all of these rules came from Moshe rather than something written?
So Korach seemed to be challenging Moshe's involvement with the Torah. Absolutely. Now, again, that itself is an interesting angle. That's not one of the angles that we're going to have the time to deal with tonight, but that is a fabulous question and is worthy of much commentary and exploration. So question number one, Korach argued that everyone is equally holy, right? Why was he wrong? Right? Moshe deals with the hierarchy. There's a Kohen, there's a Levite, there's an Israelite. Korach is saying everyone had revelation, and everyone had revelation at Sinai. Moshe, why are you mixing in? Why are you considered higher and special? And so on. Right? That's question number one. Question number two is, why is Korach considered to be the essence of divisiveness? Let's go back to text 2. Avi, you want to read text number 2? Just go back a few pages. 176, text number 2.
He's muted. He's muted.
Avi, you have to...
Unmuted you. Okay.
There you go. Perfect.
All right. Anyone who engages in divisiveness transgresses a biblical prohibition as it is written, and he shall not be as Korah and his company.
So this text here from the Talmud doesn't just say that Korach was a divisive person. This text holds up Korach to be the very model of divisiveness, the very essence of divisiveness. And anytime in the future there is any divisiveness, where is its root, where is its source? It all traces back to the personality, the character, the argument of Korach. Why? What was Korach's argument? Korach's argument wasn't divisiveness.
Sounds to me like he was the first Reformed Jew.
Another angle that we can pursue, but not tonight. Korach's argument was equality. Korach's argument was egalitarianism. Korach said, why do you place yourself above everyone else? We're all holy. That seems to be the exact opposite of divisiveness. This is all about unity, equality, egalitarianism. Sounds so beautiful. So how did Korach become the model for divisiveness when he's the one who's saying we're all holy?
That's a good reason.
Question number 3. Korach just made this huge argument. We're all holy. Why do you place yourself higher? Why does the room need a mezuzah? Right? Why does the blue garment need tzitzis? Why does this Kohen have to get involved with the wife, with this widow? Yet, what does he say? Why did Korach aspire to a higher position for himself? Right? How does this make any sense? He's challenging leadership, yet he's claiming leadership for himself. Korach says to Moshe, the entire community is holy. Moshe says to Korach, but you want the priesthood. You're telling me everyone's holy, but now you want the priesthood. Korach to Moshe, he demands equality. What does Moshe say to Korach? You're demanding equality, but you are seeking a higher position for yourself. Right? Moshe tells him this is what you're seeking. So the question is Korach a liar and a hypocrite? And he's just looking for a power grab? He's creating division. He's fracturing the community. He's chipping away at the leadership. Why? So he can take the position of leadership? And we know from history how many freedom-loving, equality-loving revolutions turned into the most bloody and violent dictatorships. And in fact, many commentaries say yes. This is the classic example and the model of the liar and the hypocrite who is just looking for a power grab. However, we're going to explore the story from a deeper perspective, again, from the inner perspective, from the soul of the Torah. We're going to view it from the cosmic perspective. How does this story fit into the purpose for which God created the world? And how does this story advance that purpose? Yes, Phil.
Can he be considered the first politician?
Absolutely. And I have a feeling that there are many people who would wish they could press a button, and what happened to Korach would happen to some of our current politicians, if only that was the case. So you can say that. Okay, so we have 3 questions. Why was Korach wrong when the truth is we are holy? How could we say that Korach was divisive when his argument was for equality? And finally, why did he seek the priesthood for himself when he was challenging the whole notion of the higher authority? All right, we're going to introduce 3 big ideas that are going to help us understand and answer the questions. Big idea. Oh, yes, Mitchell.
Interesting point. This is put together, but in no time does it say that Korach talked to God or God got back to him, like in theory Moses got responses from God. So where did he get the chutzpah to even think he could do this?
Korach did not need to speak directly to God because he had a mirror and he enjoyed his reflection in the mirror. He derived his authority from the mirror. Although in this class, we're going to try to put on a more refined spin, a more refined perspective on his argument, right? There's definitely a surface level argument, ego, selfishness, power, hypocrisy. But again, we're going to look at it from the more soulful perspective and try to get to a deeper understanding. And we have to begin, again, with the big idea number 1, understanding the differences between the hierarchy in the Jewish people. Korach seemed to be challenging the hierarchy. So first of all, what is the hierarchy? We know that there are Israelites, there are Levites, there are Kohanim, and there is the Kohen Gadol, there's the high priest. Now, in the biblical era, these were critically important. They were major issues that affected the daily lives of every single Jew. To be a Kohen, to be a Levi, to be a Yisrael, to be a high priest, it had a major impact on your life. Today, not as much, but of course, the concept of a Kohen, a Levi, and a Yisrael is still very much relevant to the Jewish people today. In your book, there is figure 6.1 on page 184, but we more or less have it on the PowerPoint here as well. So if we look at the 4 different groups of people, you have the Israelites. The Israelites represented 12 out of the 13 tribes. Why do I say 13 tribes? Because the tribe of Yosef was divided into Manasseh and Ephraim. He has the double portion. So there's 13 tribes. 12 of them are Israelites. And then, of course, you have the tribe of Levi. What was the job of the Israelites? Israelites represented working class people. Another way of saying that is normal people who operate in the economy and make a society function, regular people. Where did they live? They had tribal territories. That means they owned real estate. This is the category in the group of the Israelites. They were the vast majority of people. They worked they consisted of your regular traditional society and economy, and they owned their own land. Next, you have the Levites. The Levites was one whole tribe. Their job was not to go to work in the economy, in the world at large. They were meant to live a life that was dedicated and focused on spirituality, and all their jobs and all their work related to the spiritual. Where did they live? There were certain cities that were designated for Levites. They could not own real estate in the traditional way that the typical Jew did. Then we have the priests. the Kohanim. They were the smallest group because they are just the descendants of Aaron, Moshe's brother. Their job was even more specific, that they actually served in the temple itself. Now, the Levites also served in the temple. They played music, they sang songs, they assisted the Kohanim, they provided security, but they didn't actually do the service in the temple. But Aaron's descendants, the Kohanim, they actually performed all the services in the temple. Where did they live? Also in Levite cities, which means they could not, they didn't own land in the traditional sense. Then we have the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. There was only one high priest, and he functioned as the holiest of all people. That means his life, his interactions was much more restricted than even a regular Kohen whose life was already restricted. What was his job? Well, technically he could perform any of the services of the temple, and he did. What was reserved for the Kohen Gadol was the holiest of holy services, which is of course the incense and the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. Where did he live? In Jerusalem, and he spent his time at the Holy Temple, and he did not own property in the traditional sense. If you want to subdivide all of these four groups into two categories, you have Israelites and you have Levites and priests, including the high priest. The life of the Israelite was to build an economy, to have a job, to build a business. Maybe you were a farmer. Maybe you were a shoemaker. Maybe you were a real estate developer, right? Maybe you had a casino in Las Vegas. Okay, maybe not. Maybe that wasn't the ideal. But their business, you went out there. You became a doctor. You became a lawyer. There was a world, right? That is the job of the Israelite. The Israelite is build a normal, functioning, healthy world with all of the jobs and with all of the technology and with all of the things that are necessary for that world. Then you have the Levites and the priests. The Levites and the priests were set aside by God to pursue spiritual vocations. They served in and around the temple when they weren't working in the temple, because they were actually divided up into 24 groups, and each group served for a week or two in the temple a year. They were scribes, they were rabbis, they were judges, they were teachers. They were meant to live a life of role models for the rest of the Jewish people. Now, have you seen up to this point in this course a similar division between people that were meant to live a more materially focused life versus people who were meant to live a more spiritually focused life? Is this an idea that you've seen before? Mark, you're shaking your head. Who would be the examples?
I guess Esau would be the more material. I assume that's the analogy.
Yeah, and who's the spiritual?
Jacob.
Jacob, absolutely. Right, in previous lessons we discussed, there is always this tension between the Yaakov lifestyle and the Esav lifestyle. Esav represents the modality of living, of being involved in the material world, being a doctor, being a lawyer, being a businessman, a farmer, a shepherd, a craftsman, being out there in the world and building society. That was the Esav approach to life. And then you have the Yaakov approach to life, which was a completely and solely spiritually focused occupation. But what do we know? That Yaakov ended up getting the brachas that Esav were supposed to get, and it became part of Yaakov's mission to pursue the physical and the material as well for the purpose of transforming the world. This was a tension that in his life was very challenging. He wanted to marry Rachel and had to be tricked into marrying Leah, because where was his heart? Spiritual occupation. The same issue, Yosef and the brothers, right? The brothers followed the model of the Israelites, the material occupation. Yosef followed the model of the spiritual occupation. So there was this tension that existed, Yaakov and Esav, Yosef and the brothers, which trickles down all the way to the battle between Korach and Moshe as well, as it is reflected in the differences between the Israelites and the Levites and the priests. So this is big idea number one, recognizing that there is a difference between the way of life of the Israelites and the way of life of the Levites and the priests. Big idea number two. Critical to understanding the story of Korach is to understand the story that preceded it. The story of Korach did not happen in a vacuum. The story of Korach followed directly after the incident of the spies and inspired the incident of Korach. So briefly, what is the story of the spies? The Jewish people are redeemed from Egypt. They gather at the foot of Mount Sinai. They receive the Torah, right? They now have their mission. They have their spiritual constitution, so to speak. They are now meant to go straight to the land of Israel, conquer it, build a temple, settle it, be a light unto the nations. From there, the light of morality and ethics will shine and reach and spread to the rest of the world. However, the Jews feel that before they attempt a war to conquer the land of Israel, maybe they could use some intel, right? They could use a little bit of information. So they get 12 men that the Torah describes as righteous to go to the land of Israel and spy it out. They come back, 10 of them have a terrible report. They say, we will be devoured by the inhabitants of the land. We will not, we cannot, it's not going to happen. This throws the Jewish people into a panic. They're freaking out, they're going crazy. God brought us into the desert to murder us here. There was not enough graves in the land of Egypt. He has to bring us here to die. God says, you are not worthy of entering the land of Israel. Therefore, you will remain in the desert for 40 years. You will die out, and a new generation who can appreciate the land of Israel, they will merit to go into the land of Israel. Now, the question, of course, is, how on earth could the spies mess up so badly? The Torah itself says that these were righteous people. These were holy people. They were all kosher. How is it possible that they went into the land of Israel, came back with a horrible report, which led to the deaths of so many people? The answer is the reason that they messed up was actually because they were tzaddikim. It's because of their completely focused, dedicated, one-track approach to holiness and righteousness that they made a mistake. And this was their argument. Their argument was, we need to be tzaddikim like Yaakov. How did Yaakov live? Yaakov was a person who dwelt in tents. He was a person who desired to live a life separate from and outside of society, sheltered from the rest of the world. So he can pursue Torah, mitzvah, spirituality, grow and ascend of it. The outside world was going to be irrelevant. What did they want? They loved living in the desert. Living in the desert was the greatest possible experience for the spies who desired the path of tzaddikim. They had Moshe, the greatest prophet to ever live. They had a Mishkan, a portable temple that accompanied them everywhere they went. They were surrounded by the clouds of glory that did everything for them. It regulated the temperature. It provided protection. The Torah says that it even did their laundry for them. They were living in bliss. They had no material concerns or needs, as food literally fell from the sky, right? The manna fell from heaven. They felt life could not get better than that. They absolutely dreaded going into the land of Israel because they knew that when you go into the land of Israel, real life is going to begin. They're going to have to build cities. They're going to have to build hospitals. They're going to have to build schools. They're going to have to build an economy. They're going to have to work day and night. And who wants that? Certainly not them. They were not interested in that at all. They ran away from their material calling, just as Yaakov did. And he had to be tricked into marrying Leah. Just as Yosef did. He had to be sold by his brothers as a slave in order to actually enter the physical and material world and to appreciate that, right? The Yaakovs and the Yosefs of the world, the tzaddikim, the people who have the soul of a tzaddik, have a very, very hard time relating to the physical, the material, and do everything in their power to run away, right? They believed that it would consume and destroy them just as the physical and material consumed and destroyed Esav. They were worried, they were nervous, they felt that entering to the land of Israel, Judaism would be dead on arrival. It simply would not be able to function. The spies did not want to engage with the material world. There's a beautiful text number 8, but it's quite long, and it essentially says exactly the idea that I just did, and I don't want to go too late over time, but it's worthwhile reading yourself perhaps after the class. So as righteous as these spies were, because they were righteous, and they wanted to pursue a life where they could maximize their ability to be and to grow in righteousness, nevertheless, they were totally wrong. Why were they wrong? What is the purpose that God created the world? What is the mission statement of humanity? To make a dwelling for God in the lowly realms. That is what God wants. God wants us to take this physical material world, build it, make it, create it, but make an economy that is going to reflect its godly source and its godly origin. So this is the story of the spies. The story of the spies directly led in and inspired Korach, because the message of the story of the spies is the mission of the Jewish people is not to be secluded scholars. It's not to be righteous people that wall yourself off from society and make spirituality irrelevant. No. The job of the Jewish people is to enter into the physical world, to be the doctors, the lawyers, the business people, the real estate developers, and so on. This is the mission of the Jewish people. So Korach is a smart guy, right? He listens very well to this message. And what does he hear? He hears that the main event is the physical and the material. This is where the Jewish people should place their emphasis and focus. So now he asks himself a question. Who is holier? The tzaddik or the farmer? The tzaddik or the businessman? Who is holier? Another way of saying it, who is holier? The Kohen or the Israelite? Because Korach does recognize the fact that there is a Kohen. He, in fact, wants to be one. He does recognize that there is a Kohen, and he recognizes that there's an Israelite. He knows that God himself was the one who ordained these things to be. But now that he has this new information, that the most important thing is to settle the physical world, he has a question. Who's holier? Is it the Kohen or is it the Israelite? Is it the tzaddik or is it the businessman? And what does he come up with? He says, wait a minute. Moshe, why do you place yourself as above the rest of the Jewish people? All of the Jewish people are holy. Right? The entire congregation is holy. Yes, you, Moshe, are holy. Yes, you, Aaron, you are a Kohen, you're holy. But you cannot forget about the rest of the Jewish people who are holy too. Now, before we continue, we have to appreciate this question. How could Korach compare the holiness of Moshe and Aaron to your average Jew? Does it make any sense to you? Moshe is the greatest of the greats. Aaron is the hand-picked handpicked Kohen Gadol, the handpicked high priest. You're going to compare that to a very fine, wonderful, regular Jew off the street? Yes, all Jews are holy, all Jews are great, but it's not the same. So here comes Korach and says, wait a minute. What did we learn from the story of the spies? We learned from the story of the spies is that the reason that the world was created is to make the physical world a dwelling place for God. The reason that the world was created was to build an economy, to build a society, and in that economy and in that society should reflect the mission and the purpose of God. Who builds that society? Who fulfills the purpose of the world? It's the Israelites. It's the 12 out of the 13 tribes. Who are the ones who actually fulfill the purpose of creation? It's the Israelites. These are holy people. All the Jewish people are holy. They're uniquely, specifically, specially holy because they fulfill the purpose for which God created the world. So now he says, Moshe, who's holier? You're all getting up in our business, right? To use that expression. You're all getting involved. You got to be the white string, the blue string on our tzitzis. You got to be the mezuzah on the door, right? You're getting all involved with the widow. Well, who are you? We're doing the job, right? We are the ones who are making the world the holy place, the Israelites, right? The Israelites are the one who are fulfilling the purpose for creating the world. The Israelites are just as holy as you, Moshe. The Israelites are just as holy as you, Aaron, because we're fulfilling the purpose for which the world was created. This is Korach's approach. This is Korach's argument. This is Korach's issue. To understand it even deeper, Korach did not deny that there was such a thing called a Kohen or a Levi and an Israelite, because Korach himself was a Levite, which means Korach's orientation in this world was to be a tzaddik. Korach was no Esav. Korach was no thug, criminal, or robber. He was not looking for excuses. Korach wanted to maximize his spiritual abilities to the greatest degree possible, right? That was Korach, right? He wanted a spiritual life for himself. That's what he wanted. However, he also saw material life as equally important. He was presenting this view. There are two methods and two ways to serve Hashem. One is a method that is completely immersed in the spiritual life. That happened to be him and what he wanted. He was a Levi. And then there's another model. And that model is to immerse yourself in the material world, the business world. And he says they're equally important. They are both necessary, legitimate, holy paths. This, by the way, is why Korach did not want to give up his role as a Levi. That was not part of his equality spiel. What did he want? He wanted to be the Kohen Gadol. Why? Because his goal was spiritual perfection. He wanted to be the greatest tzaddik, the most righteous person that he can be. What was his aspiration? His aspiration was to be the Kohen Gadol. So this actually answers one of our previous questions. He was not a hypocrite or a liar. He valued the role of the Israelite, and he valued the role of a Kohen and a Levite. And he personally was a Levite, and he wanted to pursue that path to the utmost. But he argued that the life of an Israelite is just as holy as Moshe, and therefore Moshe can't mix in, and Aaron can't mix in, because the Jewish people are just as holy. However, this insight makes the two other questions that we asked stronger. It makes them stronger. Why? Question number one was, why was he wrong? What did he say that's wrong? The Jewish people are absolutely holy. The Jewish people fulfill the mission for which the world was created by settling it, right? The story of the spies supports his claim. The story of the spies was We don't stay in the desert, go into the land of Israel, be a businessman, right? That supports his claim that the Israelites are holy and Moshe doesn't need to mix in. And the question number 2, why do we say that he is the essence of divisiveness? Exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. He was saying parallel tracks are ideal. There's the path of the Levites and the Kohen, and there's the path of the Israelite, and they're both holy. That's what he's saying, equality. So how can we say that Korach is the essence of divisiveness? So here we present, right, big idea number 3. And that is, and you may recognize this idea from some previous classes because it's the same theme that replays itself in different ways throughout history, including our lives today, that both are absolutely needed. Absolutely. However, Korach did not read the fine print, right? You always got to read the fine print. Yes, living a materially focused life can absolutely be holy and special, and you fulfill the purpose for which God created the world. Absolutely, without a doubt. But that can only be possible with one perspective, with one insight that Korach missed. Korach felt that the material pursuit and the spiritual pursuit are equal. That is incorrect. The spiritual pursuit is higher and the material pursuit is lower. Now, wait a minute, you might get nervous. What happened to all that great equality before? What happened to us fulfilling the purpose of creation by settling the world? So let me explain. Only when we recognize that the greater pursuit in life is to reveal and to bring spirituality into this world, will we have the ability to go out into the physical and material world and impact it and to transform it. When we recognize it's the spiritual pursuit in life that's primary, and because the spiritual pursuit in life is primary, therefore, I can go out into the material world and I could transform it. Can you be successful? But if you believe that the material is equal to spirituality, it is as virtuous, we run the danger of being transformed by it and affected by it as Esav was. We have to view the material as a means to an end. The moment we start valuing the end in itself too much, we lost the plot. It's all over. You may recognize the beautiful lesson that we had earlier, that Yaakov is meant to wear the clothes of Esav, right? You have to be the Yaakov who wears the clothes of Esav in order to fulfill the purpose and the mission, ultimately, of Yaakov. So it only works if we're conscious of this, right? The moment that we think that our foray into the material world is an end unto itself, then we are finished. Let's go to text number 9. Mark, you want to read text number 9?
Sure. This is what man is all about. This is the purpose of man's creation and of the creation of all the worlds, both the lofty and the lowly, that God should have this dwelling in the lowly realms.
The key point of that line is that we have to recognize that the material world is the lowly realms. We have to remember that, we have to call that, we have to reflect on that. If it's equality, we got big problems. Now, what do we mean by the world is lowly? Does that mean bad? Does that mean inferior? Does that mean the person who's involved with the lowly realms is pursuing some type of second-class career in the Jewish people? Absolutely not. It means this. There is something that's higher, that's spiritual. There's something lower, that's material. The higher realms should descend to the lowly realms. The attitude is the higher realms are impacting and inspiring and affecting the lower realms. The lowly realms should ascend to the higher realms. So the perspective always is the holier has to lift up that which is lower, and that which is lower has to lift up that which is higher. The nature of the spiritual realms is to be transcendent. We have to bring the transcendence into the material world. We have to enlighten the material world. The nature of the physical world is to be self-absorbed. Our mission is to allow the world to escape its own ego and its own focus on its own independence. And this was the big debate between Korach and Moshe. Korach said, look how holy it is to work with the material world. It's just as holy. The Israelite who works in the material world and fulfills the purpose for creation, it is just as holy as you. I don't need you to mix in. I don't need your influence. And again, he made that argument with the mezuzah and with the tzitzis and with the widow. We do not need the style of leadership that Moshe represents or that Aaron represents, because being involved with the material is just as holy and just as equal. And Moshe says, no. Moshe says, Korach, that is incorrect. The way that Hashem created the world is that the physical has the potential to be holy. The physical is not equal. The physical is lower. It has the potential to be made holy, but it'll only become holy when we recognize that it's lower. When we recognize that we need to elevate and transform it, only then is it going to be spiritual. So now let's answer both other questions. The first question was, why was Korach wrong? Right? What was Korach's argument? Korach's argument was the Israelites and the Kohanim are equal. Right? Look at that slide that we have here on the screen. Different roles, but all equal. Parallel roles, all equal. However, that was not God's intention. That was not God's intention. God's intention was not separate roles. God's intention was the holiness must influence the material. They're not two separate tracks. Korach equated the material work and the spiritual work. They are not two separate parallel tracks. They must interact with each other. And this answers the second question. Why is Korach considered to be so divisive? Another way of framing Korach's approach to life you'll be very familiar with. Korach's approach to life was, how should the Jewish people function? Separate but equal. How did that work out? Separate but equal. Is that a good approach to life? Right? Avi Fenster, what do you say? Separate but equal. Is that a good policy? Gail, does that work? Has history shown that separate but equal work?
No. Spoken like a true liberal.
So tell me, Avi, why does separate but equal not work?
I don't know necessarily when you say they don't work. They're two different channels. I don't know what you mean by equal. Is it?
What would be so wrong if you had two different channels? Each one was considered to be wonderful and valuable, and they didn't mix.
Oh,
there was no integration. Let's maintain segregation between the approach of the Israelites and the approach of the Levites. One is not better, one is not worse. They're separate, they're different. Let's keep them segregated. That was Korach's approach. What's wrong with that?
They were both attacking two different parts of life. The priest wouldn't have anything to do in maintaining, or shall we say, elevating the soul of the working people. And the working people would be busy with their material things and not looking at the more spiritual kind of stuff. I don't.
So you're definitely on the right path. The reality is, as history has shown, that separation and segregation ultimately breeds jealousy, inequality, frustration, anger, animosity. It does not work. You know what works? Interdependence. Because the reality is in life, there is a hierarchy. People are different. People have different roles. People have different responsibilities. People have different focuses in life. But when they each benefit each other, when they work harmoniously together with each other, that is when we are going to achieve success. Right? Why is Korach the essence of divisiveness? Because everyone is different. And differences are going to lead to conflict. If you think that you could do separate but equal, it's not going to happen. It's simply not going to work. The correct approach is differences that lead to harmony. The tzaddik, right, the Torah scholar, right, needs the business person to actually create and make a world and a society. And the business person needs the scholar, the tzaddik, for guidance, for inspiration, for spiritual direction. It creates a healthy interdependence, right? It creates a healthy society. It creates harmony. That is the way that the Jewish people are meant to work. Not as two separate societies, but as an integrated society that has a Kohen and that has a Levi and that has a Yisrael. And yes, they're different. They have different jobs and different focuses. But when we rely on each other, when we connect with each other, when we inspire each other, when we help each other, then you have a complete functioning whole. Separate but equal will end up in a disaster. And of course, this clarifies our third question, which we had already briefly answered. Why does Korach seek the priesthood? Again, because he believed in separate but equal. He believed that he, as a Levi, should pursue the ultimate in righteousness, which to him, his aspiration was the high priesthood, to be the Kohen Gadol. So what happened? What was the result of this argument with Moshe? The result is that some of his crew was swallowed up by the earth, and some of his crew were consumed by fire. The message, of course, from that is that material work without looking up is going to result in you being consumed by the earth and being consumed by the material. If you have the material life as a separate track from the spiritual life, the result is you will be consumed by the earth. And the same thing, if you have the spiritual life as a separate track, you are going to go up in smoke like fire, right? You are ultimately going to disappear into thin air, right? It's ultimately not going to work. Both alone as separate paths are simply not sustainable. What is needed to fuse both paths together? And again, we saw this with Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov having to get the brachas of Esav. We saw this with Yaakov having to marry Leah, and we see this with Yosef and the brothers having to learn to get along with each other. Once again, we see this with the Korach and the Moshe battle. Which this leads us perhaps with the ultimate takeaway from all of the stories. There clearly is a theme that was replaying in pretty much every one of these episodes, in every single one of the classes, because it's a theme that exists in our life. How do we balance the spiritual and the material? What is the answer? The answer is that if you are a person that your primary life is in the physical and the material, that means you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, you're a real estate developer, you're a business person, you have a job, you're a regular person, right? Your life, your domain is as a responsible citizen interacting with the world. That is not enough. You must also set aside time to pursue your own spirituality, to pursue your own righteousness. There has to be a tzaddik track in your life as well. You have to set aside time for prayer. You have to set aside time for learning. There's no such thing as, I'm not a rabbi, right? I'm not Hasidic. I don't wear a black hat. I don't wear a sheitel. No, even if you go to work every day, right, and contribute to the world, that's your vocation. There has to be set times for Torah study, set times for prayer, for meditation, for introspection. There has to be the cultivation of the tzaddik within each and every one of us, even if our main occupation is the business world. And the same thing applies to the tzaddik, or to the rabbi, to the person who lives a life that is dedicated to spirituality and the pursuit of spirituality. You must also reach out to your neighbor. You must also reach out to your friend. You have to interact with the world. You have to make sure that your message doesn't remain in the shul, in the synagogue, in the Beis Medrash, in the neighborhood of Yerushalayim or New York, but you have to make sure that you go out into the world and you influence and transform the world as well. Through this integrated approach, that is the way that we will actually fulfill the purpose of creation and making this world a dwelling place for God. When we do so, and we do our parts, will actually result in fulfilling the purpose of creation with the coming of Mashiach speedily in our day. So this concludes our six course series, Secrets of the Bible. Now, before we go, I want to give you a preview of the next course that's coming up. Oh, hold on a second. Did it again.
See this phone?
Here we go. The next JLI course is called Journeys of the Soul, a fascinating exploration of the journey that a soul takes before it enters our body, while it is in our body, and the experience of the soul after it leaves our body. It's going to begin on Wednesday, February 3rd, 7:30 p.m. right here in the Shul Zoom room. So you'll look for emails, letters, and so on and so forth, so that you have to look to the future. But I just want to wrap up this particular course, that I hope that this gave you a greater appreciation for the stories of the Torah. They're not just stories, they're not just historical events, but they have such profound significance that they're so important for all of us today and for the future, because they contain the essence of life, right? They contain the core of life. They contain the struggles, the battles in life. They're reflected in those stories, but they're reflected in our lives today. And when we explore the stories and we look deeper, especially highlighting the Hasidic interpretations, as we've done in this class, you could see the depth, the richness, the genius, the brilliance, and also the practical application the Torah has. So I hope this inspires you and encourages you to pursue your studies, certainly of the weekly Torah portion, on a deeper level. There are so many resources, there are so many avenues with which a person can pursue and to learn. We have a weekly Torah studies class on Tuesday nights. So Tuesday night at 7:30, we have a JLI class based on the weekly Torah portion. So it's an hour long. There are some texts. There is a PowerPoint as well. You do not have to sign up for and come to every single class. Pop in when you can. It's a great way of getting a quick hit of a Hasidic interpretation on the weekly Torah portion. Now, Wednesday nights at 7:30, we had our Tanya class. We will resume the Tanya class once again, but not next week because it's Hanukkah. Not the week after that because this is a holiday vacation type of week. But the week after that, probably in January, and for 3-4 weeks until we start the next JLI class, we will get back to the Tanya class. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining. I hope that you enjoyed, and I look forward to more learning opportunities with you again in the future.